And when you go beyond the walls of the university, you will meet plenty of that. And I entirely support the woman who said, just confront it.
Okay.
No, I don't on this case. I think that this is a different situation where the lecturer is acting under the auspices of the university. The views expressed why are they expressing those views in the first place? It doesn't seem to be relevant to what the kids, what the students are learning. And the other thing is, you have to be very brave, I think, to take on a tutor, and you must worry about the repercussions of doing so when they have your, marking in your hand.
Yeah.
So I think in this case, she was wrong to call them snowflakes, and she should have.
I don't think she did, but it's just, that's the term used.
Yeah.
All right, it's because it's difficult to speak truth to power if you're a mere student.
That's
and
right.
He's the lecturer.
And I think, grow up, feeling uncomfortable, don't go running and telling the teacher, but I think this was a little bit more than that.
All right, the one closer to home, we keep meaning to talk about this, and I notice it's still bubbling away. Dr. Raymond Richards teaches American history at the University of Waikato. He made a comment on a Z Energy Facebook post about diversity in the workplace. He wrote, "Who needs employees if they stop work 5 times per day to talk to an imaginary being?" The Islamic Women Council of New Zealand this week said Muslim women face a high level of discrimination in gaining employment. Comments such as these from an academic like Dr. Richards, even if they're made in a private capacity, will tend to carry more weight and increase the likelihood of discrimination in employment. He says, religion's fair game. Religion's an enemy of education. I'm speaking as an individual. I'm expressing my own personal opinion. I think it's very important people exercise their freedom of speech and not be intimidated. Islam is not a race, it's a religion. Some people say racism when you criticise a religion, and they need to understand religion is an idea. So, what do both of you think about that?
I think if he's talking about invisible beings, he's probably had a go at Christianity as well.
I think he's had a go at the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints in the past.
Well, it's offensive. It was on his own Facebook page, and if he feels that way, I think he should be outside the university, entitled to say it.
He's arguing rationally, and he's saying quite rightly that you can't change your race, you can change your religion, but there is, if you are born, say, in Pakistan, there is a cultural ingredient to a religion rather than just you adopt that religion by choice as an adult. It is something which you are indoctrinated with, and it is like drinking water. It is absolutely fundamental to who they are, and it's not a million miles from being race. So I can understand he's being nice in his distinction and entirely rational and fair in his distinction, but it doesn't quite work like that. I think he'd be wiser to be quieter.
The university
He's not helping.
The university says today that this is the last issue, that it's taking the matter seriously, it's investigating, it doesn't condone language or actions that perpetuate hate, discrimination, harmful stereotypes. So should the university take action?
No. I don't know. Was it made in a private capacity? And I think if you start strangling people, even if they are highly offensive, there's a slippery slope.
On a Z website, was it?
Yeah, it was.
An odd thing to do.
Well, it was a discussion about diversity, you see. That's why he chimed in.
On a petrol station website. Anyway, fine.
Diversity's everywhere,
Netflix.
Joe.
Yes.
Joe Bennett's been on the panel today. Thank you very much for coming on, Joe.
It's been a great pleasure, Jim. Thank you.
And Alexia Russell. Thank you, Alexia.
Thank you.
That's us. We're back tomorrow, everybody, and Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Tonight on Checkpoint, Labor's tax plans, specifically residential land tax. What are they considering? The most powerful Atlantic Ocean hurricane in recorded history bears down on the Caribbean and southern US states, some of them areas that were hit by Harvey. Back home, the west coast is struck by tornadoes and Auckland is belted with intense thunder and lightning. Are household wooden spoons being used in Waikato Hospital's operating theatre, along with kitchen sieves and shaving blades? And as Jacinda Ardern and Bill English fight it out and get media coverage as if it were a first-past-the-post election, we hold a debate over cake to celebrate the 21st birthday of MMP. James Shaw, Marama Fox and David Seymour join us at length.
RNZ News at 5. Maloa Lele, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The Labour leader is refusing to rule out taxing people's residential sections, although the family home sitting on the land would be exempt. A land tax generally takes the form of an annual levy based on the value of the land. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Jacinda Ardern says Labour does not have a position on a land tax, but that could be an option for the tax working group, which would be established under a Labour government. Ms Ardern has specifically ruled out the family home itself being subject to a capital gains tax, but would not give the same assurance for the land the building sits on. In 2010, a tax working group recommended a land tax as part of a broader package to make the system fairer and to provide sustainable revenue for the government. That recommendation was rejected by the National Government at the time. This is Jane Patterson.
The National Party leader, Bill English, says there's no need for a cross-party accord on how to tackle child poverty. The Children's Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, says now that the two major parties have agreed to a target to lift 100,000 children out of poverty, it's time all political parties agreed on a common approach to do that. But Mr English says National is already well on the way to achieving the target, with the families package announced in this year's budget, coupled with strong economic growth.
We can't agree with Labor's economic policies, which are a critical part of underpinning our progress on child poverty, as well as the announcement we've made today for those young people who get locked into long-term welfare dependency. So if they want to stall the economy, you can't solve these other problems.
Bill English. The Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern, backs the idea of a cross-party accord and says she's previously written to government ministers to try and encourage a collaborative approach. Two New Zealand-born bikies facing deportation have overturned the Australian Immigration Minister's powers to revoke their visas without disclosing why. Australia's highest court has ruled the law that prevented courts testing Minister Peter Dutton's decisions is invalid. Phil Pennington reports.
Two members of the Rebels Motorcycle Club, AJ Graham of Tasmania and Mayor Hakatepui of Perth, took the case and won. It's not clear when they might be released from immigration detention. Their lawyers say the ruling would have ramifications for other detainees mounting challenges, many of whom are New Zealand citizens. The Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton, had previously warned that an adverse ruling could lead to 15 criminals and at least one jailed terrorist being freed. The federal government, fearing today's ruling would go against it, is trying to push through a law change to help keep information secret in visa cases like these. This is Phil Pennington.
And further to that story, a friend of Mr Tepuia says he had been released and was in the car on the way to see his children, but was pulled over and taken in by Border Force officers. The friend said Mr Dutton has revoked his visa again. Victoria's Supreme Court has approved the biggest human rights settlement in Australian legal history. Under an out-of-court agreement, the Australian government will pay $56 million to 1,300 current and former Manus Island detainees. They're being compensated for being illegally detained between 2012 and 2016 and for negligence in the way the government housed and protected them. However, a lawyer for some of them, Daniel Webb, says this doesn't mean all of the problems on Manus Island have been fixed.
It's not good enough for the government to just throw hush money at the abuses of yesterday. It's got to actually stop the abuses of tomorrow. I mean, it's an incredibly tense and dangerous time on Manus Island right now. The Australian government is bulldozing the place, but the innocent men trapped inside it for the last 4 years still don't have anywhere safe to go.
Lawyer Daniel Webb. The Australian government wants to close the detention centre by the end of next month. Officials in a string of Caribbean islands have ordered people to evacuate as one of the strongest storms ever recorded in the Atlantic approaches. Hurricane Irma is now a Category 5 storm with winds of nearly 300 kilometres an hour. Antigua is one of the first islands in the storm's path. Angelica O'Donoghue is the chief editor of the Antigua Chronicle.
Well, we are expecting some serious wind. We are expecting flash floods, storm surge waves as well. But to be honest, according to all the meteorologists, this storm is unprecedented. So we can prepare for a hurricane as much as we can. It's never been seen before, never been experienced before. So we can only expect the worst, and we're prepared for the worst.
Hurricane Irma is also forecast to hit the British and US Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico and Cuba and the United States mainland. More thunderstorms and possible tornadoes are forecast to hit the country again overnight. A tornado tore through a pa north of Hokitika early this morning, and there were thousands of lightning strikes across Waikato, the King Country, and the southern part of Auckland. Met Service forecaster Gerard Barrow says another band of bad weather is on its way, and many of the same areas will be in the firing line. He says there's a small chance of tornadoes. It's 5:05. Sport, and the New Zealand Rugby Sevens veteran DJ Forbes has retired as the most capped player in World Sevens Series history. Forbes played in 89 World Series tournaments and a record 512 games. The 34-year-old played for New Zealand for 11 years, winning 26 tournaments and 6 World Series titles. He also captained New Zealand to gold at the 2010 Commonwealth Games and to the World Cup title in 2013. Meanwhile, the All Blacks coaches are expected to ring the changes for this weekend's Rugby Championship clash with Argentina in New Plymouth when they name their team tomorrow morning. New Zealand won their opening 2 games while Argentina lost both of theirs. However, the All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster says they're always wary of a wounded Pumas side.
The Argentinians will be a bit disappointed with that because the style of game that South African played against them you would think would suit Argentina. So what they do against us, I'm not sure, but they'll be hurting.
Ian Foster. And American tennis star Venus Williams is 1 win away from the US Open final following a thrilling win over Czech Petra Kvitova in a final set tie-break of their quarter-final in New York. The 37-year-old two-time champion next faces compatriot Sloane Stephens with an All-American semi-final possible. That's the news.
This year's general election is shaping up as one of the most closely fought in years. I'm Guyan Espiner. In 2 decades of covering politics, I've never seen an election like it.
Already we've witnessed multiple party leadership changes, polls swinging, but will we see a change of guard in the Beehive? Make sure you join us on election night, September 23rd.
And the following morning, join me, Susie Ferguson and Catherine Ryan for a major wrap-up and reflection on election 17 here on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and severe weather warnings and watches are in force for parts of central and southern New Zealand. Northland, rain easing to a few showers today, showers becoming frequent and heavier tomorrow. Western areas from Auckland to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty and the central high country, scattered showers, some heavy, turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Isolated thunderstorms north of Levin, some squally about Taranaki early tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough, rain about the ranges and showers elsewhere at times, westerly gales in exposed places tomorrow. Buller, Westland, Fiordland and the Canterbury High Country, periods of rain, sometimes heavy, squally thunderstorms, especially early tomorrow. The remainder of Canterbury, Otago and Southland, long fine spells but scattered showers also, especially about Otago and Southland. The Chatham Islands, rain clearing this evening but returning tomorrow afternoon. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Malu et alave, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Coming up on Checkpoint tonight, part debate, part conversation, part morning tea. James Shaw, Marama Fox and David Seymour on policy, survival and who will be the next PM and MMP leaders debate. 25 minutes to hear what they stand for and why. We recommend it. We think it's good listening. Also tonight, Hurricane Irma. It's big, really big. Dreamers and what's next for them, and the very American division about what happens to them, and a $70 million compensation payout to Manus Island detainees. But first, the campaign trail. And we begin with the Labour leader leaving open the option of taxing the land the family home sits on. Jacinda Ardern has ruled out applying a capital gains tax to the family home, but when pushed today, would not rule out a land tax on residential sections, a move that would impact on more than 1 million homeowners. Her comments come as the National Party unveiled new sanctions for some young people on benefits who fail a drug test or who refuse to take up jobs or training. Looking at all of this is our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Tax has emerged as a flashpoint in this election campaign, with Labour coming under pressure to provide more detail about its plan to establish a tax working group if it becomes government. And while Jacinda Ardern has ruled out a capital gains tax on the family home, it's not clear what else is on the table. Today in Hamilton, she was questioned further about a land tax, which generally takes the form of an annual levy based on the value of the land. Ms Ardern told reporters Labour does not have a specific policy on land tax.
I'm leaving all of the options available for a tax working group to work through. I have a focus on home ownership and putting greater equity into our taxation system. The rest I need to work through in office.
Ms Ardern was pressed further about whether a Labour government would tax the land the family home was sitting on.
Our target is not the family home. That is why I have ruled it out. We're focusing on what happens with particularly in the speculative area. So that is absolutely an assurance I'm giving people around when it comes to the family home.
So it's just the building,
yes,
the insurance?
Yes, yeah, and that's the complication of those various iterations. That's why I'm saying to the tax working group, I want the family home to be off the table. Please work through the options that remain available to address home ownership and to address affordability and to make sure our taxation system is fair.
You're not ruling out the land that the house is on being taxed?
I'm saying that I don't want there to be taxation applying to a family home. The rest is for the working group to work through.
Meanwhile, the National Party has announced it would crack down on young people on a benefit who refuse to take up work opportunities or continue to use recreational drugs. It would also put $72 million towards providing drug rehabilitation services for young people over the next 4 years. The leader, Bill English, told an audience at Invercargill's Southern Institute that those who refuse to do work experience or training on offer or who continue to fail drug tests would have half their benefit cut after 4 weeks of non-compliance.
With the track record already of these types of sanctions, which have been in the system for a long time, about 95% comply within a month. So the actual number of people who've had a significant reduction in their benefit is quite small, and we would expect it'll be the same with this group.
National Social Development spokesperson Anne Tolley says she's confident there will be enough people on the ground to get rehab centres up and running.
One thing we have found is when you are out there with money buying those services, it's amazing how quickly they arrive. So yes, we are confident. It might be a bit slow getting up and running, but we're confident that there's people out there that will take up those opportunities.
The Executive Director of the Drug Foundation, Ross Bell, says that's optimistic. He says there's a $150 million shortfall in rehabilitation services in New Zealand.
We've actually estimated to meet the current demands for addiction treatment and to provide help for the 50,000 New Zealanders who want help, who currently can't get it, we're going to need to double the treatment budget. We've estimated we need about $150 million of new money to deal with existing need.
The Green Party says National's latest election promise is punitive and a distraction from the pressing issue of poverty in New Zealand. It says the sanctions would be expensive to administer and would push people into more difficult financial situations. For Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Jane Patterson just quoting the Green Party there. James Shaw, Marama Fox and David Seymour will join us for an MMP election debate later in the program. But before all of that, how could a land tax actually work? Michael Littlewood is an Auckland University law professor and tax expert. He joins us now live on the line from Melbourne. Professor Littlewood, lovely to have you with us. Thank you. Given that Jacinda Ardern has explicitly and repeatedly said the family home will not be taxed, how would a land tax work in such circumstances?
There are different ways that a land tax would work, and it has a number of technical advantages over a capital gains tax. But just as with a capital gains tax, if you want to, you can structure it to exempt the family home, and you could do exactly the same with a land tax.
OK, what sort of rate would we be looking at potentially? And I know that this is, as Jacinda Ardern keeps saying, for the tax working group to look at, but what sort of rate has previously been discussed? It was looked at by the tax working group in 2010, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So I think they were suggesting a rate of a fraction of 1%, which sounds a very low rate, but it's a rate that would be applicable to the value of the property, rather than to any gain made on resale of it. So a tax at even a half or even a quarter of 1% would be a significant revenue raiser. In
fact, I'm just doing a high-speed search of what the Tax Working Group recommended in January 2010. They said then, gosh, that's 7 years ago, in which time land values have increased dramatically, but they said a 0.5 rate would raise up to about 1.6 billion, assuming the land tax is deductible for income tax purposes. So obviously it would have increased a lot since then. How do you gather that tax, Professor Littlewood? How is it collected and when?
Well, there are a number of ways of doing it. It depends also on how you structure it. So it can be a tax just on the unimproved value of the land, meaning just the value of the land without taking into account the buildings on it, or you can impose a tax taking into account also the value of the buildings. As it happens, administratively, it's a very straightforward tax, particularly since in New Zealand we already have local government rates, in respect of which the local bodies have valued pretty much all the land that exists in New Zealand. And so I suppose what the Labour Party might do or a Labour government, if we were to elect one, what they might do would be to use that as the administrative basis for the tax and perhaps exclude owner-occupied housing and impose a tax on other property in which because the system of collecting local government rates already exists, the administration could, I think, be very straightforward, and it would also have the advantage of avoiding some of the difficulties that you would have with a capital gains tax. So if your starting point is that the current tax system is unsatisfactory in that it unhelpfully favours investment in real estate, then one way you can go about dealing with that is to have a capital gains tax. Another way you can go about dealing with it is to have a land tax, and the land tax tends to avoid some of the technical difficulties that you'd have with a capital gains tax. I suppose also it might be helpful to emphasise that it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to pay more tax, because presumably it would be possible for a government to do this in what we call a revenue-neutral fashion. That is to say that if they were to introduce a new tax, whether it be a capital gains tax or a land tax, to offset that by, for example, reducing the rate of income tax.
Professor Michael Littlewood responding at very short notice to Jacinda Ardern's refusal to exclude such a tax from the considerations of the tax working group, and therefore as a possibility if a Labour government is being elected. We really appreciate your time at short notice. Thank you, Professor Littlewood. Lots going on this evening. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. The most powerful Atlantic Ocean hurricane in recorded history is bearing down on the Caribbean and southern United States. Hurricane Irma has been upgraded to a Category 5. That is the highest category, and comes just a week after Texas was hammered, of course, by Hurricane Harvey, which has killed at least 60 people and left large chunks of the state underwater. On its current projected path, there will be an overlap in the area Irma hits. Irma is projected to bring massive storm surges, life-threatening winds and torrential rainfall in a swathe across Puerto Rico, Haiti, the Dominican Republic and Cuba before moving on to Florida and then approaching Hurricane Harvey territory. Our reporter Zach Fleming has more.
Hammering, drilling and stocking up in Puerto Rico as residents brace for Hurricane Irma to barrel their way. The National Hurricane Centre designated it a potentially catastrophic Category 5 hurricane, saying Irma was the most powerful Atlantic storm ever recorded outside the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico.
I don't think Puerto Rico has ever lived through something like this.
The storm packed winds of 300 kilometres per hour as it headed toward the Caribbean and southern United States. Hurricane warnings at the highest level were posted ahead of its predictive path over the Leeward Islands, including Antigua, Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis. A state of emergency has been declared in Puerto Rico, where the governor urged the US territory's 3.4 million residents to seek refuge in one of the 460 hurricane shelters.
Unlike other hurricanes where we take a wait and see what the hurricane is going to do, this hurricane is far too powerful, poses far too great a threat for us to delay actions any longer.
Florida Governor Rick Scott urged residents to prepare for the worst.
This morning, I requested President Trump declare a pre-landfill emergency for the entire state of Florida. I just heard from the White House, and I have been told that President Trump has approved this declaration.
In Florida, residents waited in long lines for petrol and groceries as the massive storm approaches. Aerial video shows long lines of people waiting to enter a Costco in Pembroke Pines. In Miami Beach, sandbags were being prepared as residents brace for heavy rain. Irma is expected to reach southern Florida on Saturday. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
We're going to go live to Atlanta now, where it's the middle of the night, but nonetheless we are delighted and grateful to be joined by CNN meteorologist Pedram Javahiri. Pedram, thank you so much for being with us in New Zealand. What is heading towards the Caribbean and Florida and that entire area? How big is Irma?
Yeah, John, this is a remarkable storm. You know, you watch this on satellite imagery, it's as impressive as it gets, as symmetrical as it gets, as organized as it gets. And incredibly, some of the forecasts indicate this can strengthen beyond what, as you said moments ago, one of the strongest hurricanes we've ever seen in the Atlantic Ocean. So you put this together, the catastrophic implications are all over the place for an area where, frankly, immediately at this very moment, the island of Barbuda beginning to see some of the outer bands move in. We think landfall on this island would be the first of several islands to see landfall beginning in the next couple of hours. But just looking at that island, its population, 100,000 people. Its elevation, the highest point you can get here, about, say, 30 meters. So a very generally flat island here. And we know with such storms, and again, we're talking about a Category 5 and a healthy Category 5 at that. When you break down the number, John, if there was a hypothetical Category 6, this would be right up there as far as how far above a Category 5 strength it is, and it's the winds that separate it from what you need to get there. So when you look at the storm system, we know it certainly is going to be bad news for a lot of people in the immediate path across the Leeward Islands, which are, including the St. Kitts and Nevis and Anguilla and so on. That's about 1.5 million people in the path. Once you cross into Puerto Rico, you add an additional 4 million people in the path. And the track wants to take this by Thursday and Friday into areas around Cuba. Population on that island, 11 million people. And then, of course, the eastern United States, the southern United States, where tens of millions more would be on top of that. So it really is a worst-case scenario as far as what the forecasts are showing this storm to potentially do inside the next few days.
Yes, it is. That's extraordinary as you describe it, and the people in its path. And some of those countries, those islands, those communities really don't have the resilience in terms of building structures to withstand something this big, do they?
Absolutely. Some of the islands are among the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. So, and part of the reason for that is that every single year, every single September, essentially, when you have the peak season of hurricanes, they deal with such storms, and frankly, not one that is this strong that we've seen in recent memory, but similar storms push through these regions and put these folks back down on their knees, and it just takes years and years to recover from it. So you're kind of stuck in this perpetual emotion of being impacted by some of the most vicious storms our planet can create.
Pedram Javahiri, Pedram, we know it's the middle of the night, and we know you're filing non-stop for CNN, so we really appreciate you joining us live throughout New Zealand. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Pedram is a meteorologist filing for CNN throughout the night as Irma approaches these communities and, as Pedram said, is beginning to make landfall now in some of them. It's 23 minutes past 5. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Let's stay with weather. New Zealand weather. A small West Coast community had a lucky escape. They had a tornado rip through an empty preschool just metres away from homes this morning. The tornado north of Hokitika was one of a series of wild weather events across the country today. In the King Country, a Department of Conservation office was destroyed by fire, sparked by a lightning strike, and 3 homes south of Auckland were also hit spectacularly. Rowan Quinn reports.
Kaumātua sleeping at Arahura Pa were woken by the tornado roaring up the river valley from the sea, but it missed their homes, hitting the empty Kohanga Reo building instead. The Ngāti Waewae Iwi chairman Francois Tumahai has been at the Pa today and says the tornado's power is evident.
Where the windows and the doors and entries are, they've been sort of ripped out. The roof's been torn off and thrown up on the railway lines, which is probably about 250 metres away. This jibboard is, it's just an absolute mess.
Francois Tumahai says the building's unlikely to be repairable, but in many ways he feels fortunate.
If it had been 20 metres one way or the other, it would have taken out probably 1, 2, 3, 4 Kaumātua homes, so it would have been quite devastating. It is a wee bit heartbreaking, but at the end of the day, it's just a building. We can build another one, No one's hurt.
There have been other tornadoes in the area over the years, including one that destroyed a church in the 1970s.
So they're just pretty bulletproof, our old ones, and just got up, started cleaning up, and now they're up, it looks like they're up there telling the power company boys how to put the power poles back up by the looks of it. They're hard cases.
Up in the North Island, it was a noisy awakening in Bennydale in the King Country at about 4:20 this morning when the volunteer fire siren went off. Thunderstorms had been sitting across the region for about 2 hours, and the dock offices at the Puriora Forest at the base of the Timber Trail cycleway were ablaze. The Bennydale Fire Chief, Murray Patterson, says crews had to fight through bad flooding to get to the fire, and the conditions were pretty nasty when they got there.
Howling gale, driving rain, pretty cold and pretty miserable for a while.
Murray Patterson says 80% of the building was burning when they arrived.
And it's looking likely that the lightning blew a transformer, which was next to the dock office building, which would have, short-circuited the power, and that's probably the cause of the fire.
3 homes at the base of the Awhitu Peninsula southwest of Auckland were struck by lightning. The fire service says there was damage to buildings, but no one was hurt. The Met Service says there were 7,000 lightning strikes near the New Zealand coast, but 90% of them would have been over water. And a forecaster, Gerard Barrow, warns the wild weather isn't over yet.
There will be some more thunderstorm activity occurring again or intensifying, especially about the west coast of the South Island and also about the west of the North Island from Waikato down to Taranaki.
The Met Service says there's a small risk of more tornadoes, particularly in Taranaki or the west coast. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Hands up who's watched the leaders' debates. Me. Hands up who's noticed there's only been 2 leaders and most of them me. In fact, I've done quite a few of them over the years and there's only been 2 leaders and most of those too. So after 6, we're joined by James Shaw of the Greens, Marama Fox of the Māori Party and David Seymour of ACT. Winston Peters wasn't available to discuss the policies they think matter most, who they think will win and actually to take stock of their own chances. We also had cake, which was delicious. All of that at some length after 6 o'clock, and we do recommend it because we hope you will learn something. But before 6, some quick fire questions. We began with David Seymour's end-of-life choice bill. Who's going to support it? James Shaw?
I'm going to support it through the Select Committee. In fact, Green Party policy is almost exactly that. We've got to see how the bill plays out, but definitely get it into Select Committee.
Marama?
No, I'm not a supporter of the bill. I have talked to David about it at length and to Whānau about it. I think that if it gets to Select Committee, and we're supportive of hearing the submissions that will come.
David, obviously you're a supporter of it. Why, in 15 seconds?
Oh, because it's just wrong that in 2017 we allow people to commit amateur violent suicide, we let people refuse food and medicine and suffer to the bitter end, we let doctors give you a little bit too much morphine, but we don't give people a choice when they're suffering at the end of their life. OK, child poverty is suddenly central to the election campaign. Bill English is going to reduce it if he's Prime Minister by 100,000 over 3 years. I know James Shaw, the Greens, said the same thing 6 years ago. What is the single most important thing that can be done to reduce child poverty, David Seymour? You've got to build more houses. If you don't build more houses, we might as well forget it.
Marama Fox?
You need to pay a living wage and index it to the median wage, so every time that goes up, so does the living wage as a minimum.
James Shaw?
You have to fix the housing market, and you also have to do something about incomes, because at the moment people are struggling to make ends meet on even minimum wage jobs. Half the people who are living in cars and garages have jobs.
Is the health sector performing, the public health sector performing, and if not, what is the response? James Shaw?
Broadly speaking, it is. There are some real deficiencies, particularly in the area of mental health, and that is why that is such a big issue in this election campaign.
Marama Fox?
Mental health is completely screwed. You cannot get the support you need inside the mental health system right now. That needs a huge overhaul, and rural access to vital and essential services like dialysis, like chemotherapy, and GP services, actually.
David Seymour.
Look, for the amount of money we put in, we get pretty good health care in New Zealand. Remember, the Australians spend about 30 or 40% more for what they get, but we do need to consolidate those DHBs. Having 20 in such a small country is ridiculous, but ultimately it comes down to economic growth, so we can afford the drugs, the medical equipment and the healthcare professionals that can move around the world very easily.
It is about priority of spending, though. I mean, you can get as much money into the government coffers as you like, but if you don't prioritise it, it doesn't go in.
Just edit that bit out.
Just edit that bit out.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, the Minister of Broadcasting.
Low value contribution.
Hold on.
These guys are the parties of government.
Wait, that's why you're not.
This is how much fun being in government is.
Stop. Capital gains tax, who supports it?
Yes, absolutely.
On what, James Shaw?
Comprehensive capital gains tax. That's the only way to remove
on the family home?
No, not on the family home. On investment properties and other asset classes, because you've got to remove the bias in the tax system and level the playing field.
Marama Fox?
No, only if it comes in after a second or third home, because that's somebody's savings towards their pension. That's why mums and dad Kiwis get a second and third investment home, because otherwise they can't afford their pension.
David Seymour?
Look, the reality is we actually have one. If you buy and sell homes with the intention of making a profit, you've got to pay tax on that. But the real problem is we're not building enough homes, the price is going up, and if prices go up 100 grand a year, no one cares if there's a 30% tax on that. They're still making 70 out of speculation. We have to fix the housing market, then we won't care about the CGT.
I agree with that.
Okay, I need these answers to be tight, otherwise I won't get to you. Okay, so what is the biggest problem facing New Zealand right now, Marama Fox?
Inequality.
Housing market.
James Shaw.
Housing market.
That was James Shaw, Marama Fox and David Seymour. Quick fire questions. They will debate at length and in depth after 6. Coming up on Checkpoint, forget Barnaby Joyce. Whangarei has its own citizenship scandal. Are household wooden spoons really being used in Waikato Hospital's operating theatres, along with kitchen sieves? And meet the New Zealanders heading to the World Mini Golf Champs. Yes, they do exist, and so too, Katrina Batten, to the 5:30 headlines, because it's 5:30.
The Labour leader has moved to clarify her party's position on taxing residential land, saying any tax would not hit either the family home or the land it sits on. Earlier today, Jacinda Ardern refused to rule out taxing people's residential property, although she's always ruled out applying a capital gains tax to the family home itself. Now, she says while a tax working group could consider a land tax, the family home and the property would be exempted. She says even if the working group recommended a broad tax covering all land, that would not be taken up by a Labour government. Nationals leader Bill English says there's no need for a cross-party accord on how to tackle child poverty. The Children's Commissioner says now that the two major parties have agreed to a target to lift 100,000 children out of poverty, it's time all political parties agreed on a common approach to do that. But Mr English says National is already well on the way to achieving the target. Two New Zealand-born bikies facing deportation have overturned the Australian Immigration Minister's powers to revoke their visas without disclosing why. Australia's highest court has ruled the law that prevented courts testing the minister's decisions is invalid. However, one of the men has already been taken in by Border Force officers after being released. A friend says his visa has been revoked again. Victoria's Supreme Court has approved the biggest human rights settlement in Australian legal history. Under an out-of-court agreement, the Australian government will pay $56 million to 1,300 current and former Manus Island detainees. Officials in a string of Caribbean islands have ordered people to evacuate as one of the strongest storms ever recorded in the Atlantic approaches. Hurricane Irma is now a Category 5 storm with winds of nearly 300 kilometres an hour. A body found in Lake Wakatipu by police divers this morning has been confirmed as that of missing Dunedin man Fabian Dobson. The police have extended their sympathies to the 27-year-old's family and have referred the matter to the coroner. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Let's get to business news now. I think I've been past something actually, so I'm going to get to that. Should we get to that next very quickly? Just returning to our lead story about Labour's position on a possible land tax. The Labour leader called RNZ in the last half hour to clarify her party's position on taxing residential land, saying any tax would not hit either the family home or the land the family home sits on. Earlier today, Jacinda Ardern refused to rule out taxing people's residential sections, although she's always ruled out applying capital gains tax to the family home itself. Now she says while a tax working group could consider a land tax, the family home and the land that it sits on would be exempted. That clarification from Jacinda Ardern. Since Jane Patterson's story went to air, she says even if the working group recommended a broad tax covering all land, that would not be taken up by a Labor government. Responding to Jane Patterson's story that we began the program with tonight, that statement just in from Jacinda Ardern. Let's get to the evening business news now with our reporter Jonathan Mitchell joining us from Wellington. Hi, Jono, nice to have you with us. Job advertisement numbers hitting a record, I believe.
That's right. And John, if you want a job, head to the regions. That's where the detail and the numbers are coming out today. This is RNZ's monthly look at job ads. Rose are seasonally adjusted 1% in August when compared with July. If we delve a bit deeper into the detail, Auckland is going backwards. Auckland advertisements have been pulling back in recent months, so the regions are where it's at. Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch are now below the national average. A reason for that, employers going out to the market advertising for skilled staff. They're not finding the right candidates, so they're pulling their advertisements. So that's one reason, and highlights really the tough time some sectors of the economy are having in employing the right staff.
What about what's happening over the Tasman? So the regions are strong in terms of needing people to work there and jobs being available. What's happening in Australia? What are their quarterly economic growth numbers telling us, Jono?
Well, certainly in line with expectations. There was a bit of excitement yesterday when some early data was released, but if we look at the number for Australia's GDP, that's economic growth for the June quarter, it was 0.8%. That took the annual rate to 1.8%. Really, the drivers of that were things like household consumption, so consumers in Australia going out spending on food, clothing and furnishings, as well as Australian trade and their construction sector. So this quarter's growth was much better than the soggy start to 2017, and it looks as though Australia's economy is picking up pace. The outlook is looking pretty good. Investments really strong for Australia outside of the mining sector, which, as we know, has really pulled back. But back here, though, in terms of New Zealand, we'll get a reading on New Zealand's economic growth for the June quarter in a few weeks' time. By memory, that's a couple of days before the election, so Thursday, the 21st of September. Look for a reading around 1% for that quarter.
Thank you very much, Jono. What happened on the markets today?
A little bit soggy across the board. North Korea jitters. But back here, though, the top 50 index closed up 13 points to 7790. And that Kiwi dollar, 72.3 US cents, 90.5 Australian. John.
Jonathan Mitchell joining us from our Wellington newsroom. Waikato Hospital's Clinical Director of Patient Safety emphatically denies household wooden spoons are being used in its operating theatres. A document released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act revealed household sieves were being used in urology surgeries, wooden spoons in cardiac procedures and shaving blades for skin grafts and plastic surgery. The document states household spoons are used an average of 13 times a month. That's household spoons, and large wooden spoons an average of once a month. But Dr. Doug Stevenson, who's the Clinical Director for Quality and Patient Safety at the Waikato DHB, says no wooden spoons here. With increasing pressure on DHBs to meet targets, I asked him if this is a cost-saving exercise.
I've talked to people in theater, in sterilization, cardiac surgery, vascular surgery, orthopedic surgery. Nobody uses wooden spoons. So I guess we need to correct that to begin with. I know that it's on this list.
It's on the list we have that we've obtained under the Official Information Act, and it says large wooden spoon, cardiac, used to control hemorrhaging during ruptured AAAs.
It's exactly what it says. So let me clear that up to start with. When you have let me back up just a little bit further. I'm a general physician. I'm also the Clinical Director of Quality and Patient Safety, and have the good fortune of being the acting Chief Medical Officer today.
Right. Have you ever used a wooden spoon?
Not in surgery. No,
and not to discipline an unruly patient?
Maybe. Well, yeah.
No,
so what they do, John, is they do have a thing. Now, this is not going to be proper surgical terminology, but I would refer to it as a wooden wedge. Now, what this wooden wedge does is a very specific purpose. It's not used often, but it is in the sterile packaging specifically around ruptured aortic abdominal aneurysms. What can happen in those circumstances is, you get this big blood artery in your belly, and when that thing bursts, you're going to die very rapidly unless something very, very emergently occurs. So our very brave, I don't do it, I'm a physician, our very brave surgeons, get that open, get in there, and they actually take this wooden block or wooden wedge and insert it in to stop the blood flow. They have to use wood because metal is too harsh and it'll actually tear the aorta. So the wood is just pliable enough that it'll stop the blood flow, which allows them enough time to get the proper clamps and all those things in place.
So this is a life-saving procedure?
It is a life-saving procedure.
And wood is appropriate. So, in fact, if you were using a wooden spoon, that wouldn't actually be outrageous, would it?
Well, I just could never find anyone who's used a wooden spoon. It's possibly... It went from a wooden wedge. Now, metal spoons are used in surgery, no doubt, and it's not just in New Zealand.
In fact, average per month over 2014 to date, 13 household spoons have been used for the removal of bone debris during surgery or to spoon up bone granules.
Yeah, and I can actually go a little further than that. So we do have spoons of the proper grade metal for sterilization that the cardiac surgeons use. So when they're actually taking a needle through skin and the heart's just below that, instead of taking the needle into the heart, which you can see would not be ideal, they literally put a spoon in between the needle and the heart so that the needle will not penetrate into the pericardium, the sac around the heart.
Absolutely.
That absolutely is used, and different surgeons in different places and different specialties use that for a similar reason.
I guess
but those are absolutely sterilizable.
Yeah,
Go
absolutely.
ahead, John. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. But I guess what we're talking to here is, and if we look at the list, household spoons, large wooden spoon that you've dealt with, domestic sieves, cultures, or shaving blades, mould vice grips, what I guess we're talking to is the financial pressure the Waikato DHB is under. Now, it's very difficult to clarify or explicitly get statement about how much pressure the Waikato DHB is under, but I understand it is considerable. Are you shopping at Bunnings or Briscoe's in order to save money?
No, John, well, let me say this. These things, as I learned today when I went and talked to my surgical colleagues, they've been using these for years. So this is nothing that has happened due to the what you alluded to as far as the budget stress that's going on right now. These are ongoing things. Now, I will say this, and you're probably well aware of the initial information that came out last month that, in fact, some DHBs were going off-site and buying these things.
Absolutely. We saw that in Dunedin, right?
Exactly right. So I will say this. So interestingly, and again, I'm clinical director for quality and patient safety, there were some things on this list that we weren't aware of. So there are a couple of things here that, frankly, are really now sterilizable gets to be an interesting conversation. But there are some things, if you're going to use a metal, it has to be a proper grade metal to be truly sterilized. It turned out some of the
We are talking here, if you are using them, we're talking about a quality spoon, aren't we? The kind of spoon that Queen Elizabeth might have alongside her cup of tea for stirring the Earl Grey.
John, that's a great example.
Right, okay.
So but it did lead to so some of these things actually they're gone. So when we discovered that in fact they are occasionally used, we realized that the metal may not reach that sterilization threshold. So it was good to get the list because some of these things had been going on for so long, people had just overlooked it.
Look, you're doing a very good job of addressing this, but and I want to push you on. And you are a man to comment on this. And I know, of course, you are in a master-servant relationship with the DHB and you don't want to bite the hand that feeds. But is the hand feeding enough?
That sounds like a setup, John.
Yeah. I mean, do you have the resources you need to purchase the stuff you need for theatre?
I believe, given these items, absolutely. I mean, if you look at, let's for instance take possibly a knee joint that's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars. It doesn't make a lot of sense to save $50 on going to Bunnings and buying a chisel as opposed to spending another $100 and buying a surgical grade chisel. So will both chisels work? Oh, absolutely. Do we sterilize them? Absolutely. But we want to confirm that anything we're using is sterilizable, which gets back to that proper grade metal. So no, these issues don't have anything to do with what's going on in the budget. So with these kinds of issues, absolutely not.
Okay, so you can reassure us on the radio that you are not penny pinching, buying domestic products that you wouldn't otherwise use because you don't have enough money to purchase proper surgical equipment.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
Dr. Doug Stevenson, Clinical Director, Waikato, DHB. Move over, Barnaby Joyce. Whangarei has its own citizenship scandal. A Whangarei district councillor has been forced to resign after discovering she's not a New Zealand citizen. Councillor Jane Golightly was born in the UK, came to New Zealand as a baby and has just found out she was a British citizen. The council says it will now hold a by-election costing up to $40,000 in the Denby ward. A devastated Ms Golightly is now hastily applying for New Zealand citizenship and says she will stand in the by-election. Our Northern reporter Lois Williams spoke to the electoral officer about how it all unfolded.
It was just brought to our attention that possibly this person was not a New Zealand citizen. So once it comes to our attention or a query is made against this sort of thing, of course, we research into it.
What, did someone dob her in?
Well, we had a phone call from a person just saying that we need to just check this out, which, of course, as I said, we did.
Was this a Whangarei person, do you know?
I'd rather not comment, thanks.
You don't know if it was a fellow councillor?
Still no comment. I've provided an undertaking of confidentiality, so we'll just leave it at that.
All right, so what happened next?
So we rang the councillor and just asked the question, are you a New Zealand citizen or not? And Councillor Golightly was quite shocked. We were asking that question, and she believed she was, but then we said, we needed some evidence of that, and that she would make some inquiries to provide that. Since that, of course, she's found out that she is not. I believe she checked with her parents first, and then we suggested she check with the Department of Internal Affairs.
And she found out that she was still, what, a UK citizen?
I understand so, yes, still a UK citizen. She did emigrate with her parents when she was 18 months old.
What are the rules? You have to be a New Zealand citizen either by birth or by naturalisation or what?
Yes, to stand for council, you must be two things. You must be a parliamentary elector and you must be a New Zealand citizen either by birth or naturalisation ceremony.
So I wonder how many other people around New Zealand, or any councillors and office holders, MPs even, might be in this position?
Well, it's an interesting question. Of course, we have had the issues across the Tasman with Australia, with the Australian government checking the validity of citizenship for their MPs. So I guess there's been a bit of profile here in New Zealand about that situation.
So when you're going to stand for council, you have to sign a declaration, right? And what does that declaration say?
Well, when you stand for council, there's a nomination paper. It's a statutory form, and that just has the person's name and details, and to be nominated by two electors from the area that the person's standing in. And also on that form, there's a checkbox to say that the person is the candidate is a parliamentary elector and a New Zealand citizen. In this case, both boxes were ticked, so we just assumed that this candidate was in fact a New Zealand citizen and a parliamentary elector.
Well, an extraordinary state of affairs. It's Electoral Officer Dale Ofsosky's talking to our Northern reporter Lois Williams. President Donald Trump says he's hopeful Congress will find the right long-term solution for hundreds of thousands of so-called dreamers, the young, undocumented immigrants brought to the US as children who've lived their lives and are very American now. His administration has announced that it's ending the Obama-era Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, or DACA program, which protected them from deportation and allowed them to live and study in the US. The Democrats have labelled the decision, which affects up to 800,000 people, a deeply shameful act of political cowardice. The BBC's Alim Makbul reports. Alim Makbul.
Anger at what's seen as the White House, once again, being anti-immigrant. Its decision affects those brought to this country illegally as children, who under President Obama were offered an amnesty. The US Attorney General announced it's been scrapped.
The effect of this unilateral executive amnesty, among other things, contributed to a surge of minors at the southern border that yielded terrible humanitarian consequences. It also denied jobs to hundreds of thousands of Americans by allowing those same illegal aliens to take those jobs.
Jimena is one of the hundreds of thousands affected, now fearful she'll lose her job and ultimately be deported.
It's tough. It's tough to think that as a young adult, you've given a lot to a country and that you love a country so much and that you feel like you've earned something and they take that away from you.
And Jesus, a paramedic who's been working to help the victims of the flooding in Houston, is another who's had his life turned upside down by this decision.
Our entire lives are here. There's nothing that's back in our countries. As a matter of fact, I haven't been back to Mexico since I was 6, so to be sent back to Mexico, I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know where to go.
As a candidate, Donald Trump said he would do this.
I will immediately terminate President Obama's illegal executive order on immigration.
But as president, faced with opposition, including from business leaders, he was more uncertain.
It's a very difficult thing for me because, you know, I love these kids. I love kids.
In the end, those on the right forced his hand, to the disappointment of those now protesting outside the White House.
This is an excuse just for the presidency to launch an attack against the immigrant community, which has really fought to get to where they are.
He's politically playing to his right-wing base. He's trying to solidify support among the most reactionary elements of our society.
Well, people here may be outraged, but they won't be surprised. This was, after all, one of Donald Trump's election promises. And there will be millions of his supporters who are today celebrating, and others who even feel he needs to go much further. The president's given Congress 6 months to come up with an arrangement that could soften the blow. But for so many who've been contributing to American society for years, there's already a sense they've been cast out.
Let's go to Christchurch now, where from November 100 fully electric vehicles will be available for residents to hire as part of a City Council-led initiative. The cars will also be used by the Council and 11 public and private sector organisations in place of their regular fleet. Colin Young reports.
It's really nice to drive, very, very pleasant.
And so have you driven an electric car before?
Only a hybrid.
So how does this compare?
I'm worried about how quiet it is, because I'm a cat owner and my cat won't hear it.
Cats aside, Rachel Cadell from the Canterbury DHB was impressed when she got to take one of the new electric cars for a spin at the launch of the car share scheme today. The DHB is one of 12 organisations planning to use the cars in place of their regular vehicle fleet. The Christchurch City Council has made the biggest commitment. It plans to retire 52 of its petrol cars and get staff to use the electric car share scheme instead. The Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, said she for one would be making use of the cars, especially at night when catching the bus became less safe.
A lot of people look to being fast followers. I think we've got an opportunity as a city to be leaders. You know, we are going to have to address emissions, but at the same time, it's actually better for air quality that we take those fumes off our streets.
Initially, the cars can be picked up and dropped off at 3 hubs with charging stations in the CBD, but the plan is to expand this to 10 hubs throughout the city. The council says the scheme won't cost it a cent because the leasing company Yugo is buying the 100 electric vehicles. Yugo's General Manager Kirsten Corson says the 12 organisations that have signed up so far will be given priority, with casual users given access through an online booking system. She says the beauty of the scheme is that vehicles will be available 24/7.
You know, it could be Uber drivers, it could be Domino pizza delivery guys.
So if I wanted to just go and sell my old Honda Accord and you know, think that I could just use this ride-sharing scheme instead, I mean, what sort of level of reliability would you be able to offer there in terms of, you know, how often these things would be available?
It obviously depends where you live. The model that we're working with now is quite CBD focused, although we do have hubs in Papanui, Fendleton and Littleton that open next year. And what we want to do over time is increase that hubs around the city.
Vicky Buck, the city councillor who pushed hard for the scheme, hopes it will grow in popularity as people see for themselves how cost effective it can be to share rather than own a car. She believes it will be a game changer.
I mean, when you start thinking about not owning cars but being able to share them from a convenient location, that's quite a different thought process as well. I mean, all that space that we use to house our cars at night could be used for something else.
And it's not just Christchurch drivers who are set to go green. The city is about to get its first rubbish truck powered entirely by batteries. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Konanyang tēnei.
When you think of mini golf, you think of going out for a bit of fun with friends or family, taking the first 3 holes pretty seriously and then going for glory shots with your eyes closed. However, it's more than just fun for a group of New Zealanders who are heading to Croatia for the Mini Golf World Champs. Yes, there are such a thing later this month where they'll be taking on the best in the business. Our reporter Matt Chatterton and Cameron Bradley White caught up with 2 of the New Zealand competitors before they flew to the Worlds in Europe.
New Zealand's had its fair share of success on the world stage when it comes to golf. Think Sir Bob Charles, Michael Campbell and Lydia Ko. Now we have a group of 9 New Zealanders, 6 men and 3 women, hoping to create some more golfing history on a mini scale. Jacques Van Zyl and Cameron Cooper are part of the New Zealand team. Cameron, who's also playing in the World Adventure Golf Masters, says the sport has a big future ahead of it.
I've been trying to get into the IOC group of families for the sports. They're looking at trying to get into the World Games in Alabama in the USA, the next one. So yeah, they're trying to make it a legitimate thing. It's massive in Europe and it's been going for, I see YouTube clips and it's 1960s, they got world champs going on in the same courses. So yeah, it's pretty big up there.
So you're playing in the adventure game, so I'm guessing that's more like the golf course we're at here at Treasure Island?
Correct, yeah. So the first one I'm playing in is the adventure one, very much like these courses, maybe just on a slightly bigger scale, more slopes, and yeah, so it should be a little bit more friendly to prepare for anyway, at least before the main one on the 20th.
And what does the main one involve, Jacques? So you're playing on, is it like a golf course like this, or is it something you might sort of experience on a proper golf course?
It's, you play on a surface that they've just built, to my understanding. That's called an Eternate course. It's very fast. The holes are all designed for you to be able to hit a hole-in-one on every hole. However, there are strong consequences if you get that first shot wrong. So, yeah, the aim is to get everyone to try and go for that hole-in-one on every hole, and that's where practice comes in handy. We will have allotted practice times for every country in the 3 or 4 days leading up to it, which is will be quite handy. So we can do as much practicing as we can to try and give ourselves a good chance.
Speaking of, I mean, the holes, the clubs you use now, I don't know if you can see this here, but I've got a standard putter that you'd use at mini golf, and I've also got a rather crappy standard dimpled golf ball in my pocket here. So I understand you don't use these sort of balls though. I see that you've got in your hand there a smooth sort of golf ball, a lot different to the one I'm holding, and the putters too are a bit different. Can you explain what's behind those?
Well, the putters, they're a lot heavier down the end of it, down this end, and we've got obviously rubber on the front. With these balls, because there's like 2,000 different types of balls, with a regular golf ball, obviously dimples fly through the air. Yeah. Because it's not leaving the ground, it's smooth. Most of them, they're almost like a squash ball. Yeah. They sort of range from really hard to really soft. They'll bounce different heights. You can drop one from a metre and it won't bounce at all, or you can drop it from a metre and it will come right back to your hand, sort of thing. Moly. So yeah, it's all about the ball for the type of hole, depending on what you need it to do, whether you just need to hit the back wall and stop, or if you just need it to keep bouncing around. So yeah, it's a bit of a science in terms of learning what kind of ball to use for which hole and how hard to hit it. So it's going to be a bit of a learning curve for us as well.
Sounds like serious business, right? So much so, the World Anti-Doping Agency will be conducting tests to ensure participants are clean. I've been reassured the New Zealand team isn't taking performance-enhancing drugs. Going to an exotic location like Croatia to compete in the Mini Golf World Champs sounds like a pretty sweet deal. but it does come at a cost. The team's self-funded, but both Jacques and Cameron set up Give a Little pages to help with some of the cost.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hard one trying to sell it to people, say, hey, I'm going to go play mini golf and they're the world champs, and they're like, really? I thought you just played on like this and like mucked around. So yeah, it'll be nice to be able to get some more sponsors on board as well for the future, which would be awesome.
The group's also teamed up with our neighbours Australia to try help cover some of the costs. But Jacques says there's more to it than just trying to be frugal.
Worked with the Aussies to get a team from them going as well, so we're actually going to have a bit of a trans battle as well, which could be quite cool.
Leaders Low Cup of mini golf.
Pretty much. So we might as well keep hold of that as well.
This could be the start of another long-running trans-Tasman rivalry. For Checkpoint, Matt Chatterton.
Shot by Bradley Wyatt. It's 1 minute before 6 after 6 tonight. Morning tea with the minor party leaders, Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox, Green Party leader James Shaw and ACT leader David Seymour. They were in this morning, actually about lunchtime, and we're going to talk to them in depth and at length. We also invited, by the way, New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters, but he was unavailable, and Opportunities Party leader Gareth Morgan was invited, and he accepted, but on Monday his media advisor called to tell us he too would be unavailable. Lots of people asking where they are. We would have been delighted to have both Winston Peters and Gareth Morgan as part of our debate. We did invite them. They weren't available. Chris Mowat. Chris is a regular correspondent. We always love hearing from you. Chris, how on earth can you not know what country you're a citizen of? Has this woman never left New Zealand? If she has, what passport did she travel on? This is beyond belief. My daughter also came to New Zealand as a baby. She has to get a visa each time she re-enters. Yeah, good point, Chris. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Maloa Lele. Good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The Labour leader has moved to clarify her party's position on taxing residential land, saying any tax would not hit either the family home or the land it sits on. Earlier today, Jacinda Ardern refused to rule out such a tax, although she has always said no to a capital gains tax to the family home itself. But she would not give the same assurance for the land the building sits on.
I want the family home to be off the table. Please work through the options that remain available to address home ownership and to address affordability and to make sure our taxation system is fair.
You're not ruling out the land that the house is on being taxed?
I'm saying that I don't want there to be taxation applying to a family home. The rest is for the working group to work through.
Now, Jacinda Ardern says while a tax working group could consider a land tax, the family home and the property would be exempted. She says even if the working group recommended a broad tax covering all land, that would not be taken up by a Labour government. One of two New Zealand-born bikies who successfully challenged the extraordinary powers used by the Australian Immigration Minister is back in detention just hours after the court decision. The High Court in Victoria ruled that the Minister, Peter Dutton, was wrong to cancel the visas of the notorious rebel gang leader AJ Graham of Tasmania and Mihaka Tapuia of Perth. It said Mr Dutton's keeping secret the information he made his decisions on prevented the courts from testing if he was overstepping his legal powers. A friend of Mr Tapuia says he had been released and was in the car on the way to see his children when he was pulled over and taken by Border Force officers. The friend said Mr Dutton has revoked his visa again. An Iranian refugee says the package awarded to Manus Island detainees is not enough. Victoria's Supreme Court has approved a compensation deal from the Australian government worth $70 million for 1,300 current and former detainees on Manus Island. They're being compensated for being illegally detained between 2012 and 2016 for negligence in how the government housed and protected them. Amir Tagina is among those who opted out of the lawsuit. He says the settlement prevents detainees from taking further legal action if more harm is inflicted on them.
The defendants still can harm people. The difficulties and the harsh circumstances are still going on, and it has not ended yet. So settling such case is absolutely not making sense.
An Iranian refugee, Amir Taginia. Islands in the Caribbean have made last-minute preparations for Hurricane Irma, the most powerful Atlantic storm in a decade, with officials warning of its potentially catastrophic effects. It's starting to hit the Leeward Islands with storm surges of 8 metres, life-threatening winds and torrential rainfall expected. The Category 5 hurricane, the highest possible level, has sustained wind speeds reaching 295 kilometres per hour. Thousands of people have been evacuated from at-risk areas. Airports have closed on several islands and authorities have urged people to go to public shelters. Irma is expected to move on to Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic next. The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has discussed the North Korean situation in his second one-on-one phone conversation with the American President Donald Trump. The leaders spoke for 30 minutes in a discussion described by Mr Turnbull as very constructive. North Korea was the main topic, as the ABC's Caitlin Gibbon reports.
Mr Trump and Mr Turnbull agreed the regime represents a grave threat to regional stability and said now is the time for the international community to exert maximum diplomatic and economic pressure. The leaders agreed China has the greatest leverage over North Korea. Islamic State's fierce campaign in the city of Marawi in the south of the Philippines was also discussed.
Caitlin Gibbon in Canberra. The jurors deciding the case of a prisoner accused of raping 3 of his cellmates have retired for a second night. William Katipa has denied 14 charges, including sexual violation and threatening to kill, and is on trial in the High Court in Auckland. The jurors began deliberating shortly before midday yesterday and deliberated all day today. They've heard over a week of evidence from witnesses, including the 3 complainants. The rapes are said to have happened inside Katipa's cell during lockdown. The Crown says Katipa used violence and threats of violence to force his cellmates into having sex. Katipa's lawyers say the allegations were made up and the complainants, one of whom is bringing a civil claim against the Department of Corrections, have motivation to lie. It's 6:05. Sport, and American tennis star Venus Williams is through to the United States Open semi-finals after a 3-set tie-break victory over Czech Petra Kvitova. Williams beat the former world number 2 6-3, 3-6, 7-6 and will be her first US Open semi since 2010. The 37-year-old says Kvitova put up a tough fight.
It wasn't easy to hold serve or to break serve. This match meant a lot to me, obviously, playing at home, and of course it being a major, and means a lot to her, coming back and being able to compete in this major and to prove, obviously, to herself that, she could defeat anything no matter what's thrown at her. So it was amazing to see her shine today.
Williams faces compatriot Sloane Stephens in the semis. It could be an all-American semi-final affair in the women's draw, with Coco Vandeweghe and Madison Keys playing their quarter-final matches tomorrow morning. The men's top seeds, Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, also play their quarter-final matches tomorrow. The New Zealand Rugby Sevens veteran DJ Forbes has retired, a record breaker, hanging up his boots after 11 years at the top level. Forbes played in 89 World Series tournaments and a record 512 games. The 34-year-old captained New Zealand to gold at the 2010 Commonwealth Games and to the World Cup title in 2013. And the New Zealand men's footballers remain on track to face 2014 World Cup runners-up Argentina in the Intercontinental Playoffs in November, after the South American side drew 1-1 with Venezuela today. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, John Thornley continues his exploration of spiritual pop songs with a couple of Kiwi numbers from Unity Pacific and Moana Maniapoto, while episode 6 of Bang looks at sex and sexuality in middle age, because there's more than 50 shades of grey. And you're welcome to join our post-Bang discussion. Text your questions or comments to 2101 or email nights@radionz.co.nz. Listen in with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Severe weather warnings and watches are in force for parts of central and southern New Zealand. Northland, rain easing to a few showers today, showers becoming frequent and heavier tomorrow. Western areas from Auckland to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Scattered showers, some heavy, turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Isolated thunderstorms north of Levin, some squally about Taranaki early tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough, rain about the ranges and showers elsewhere at times. Westerly gales in exposed places tomorrow. Bulla Westland, Fiordland and the Canterbury High Country, periods of rain, sometimes heavy, squally thunderstorms, especially early tomorrow. For the remainder of Canterbury, Otago and Southland, long fine spells but scattered showers also, especially about Otago and Southland. And for the Chatham Islands, rain clearing this evening but returning tomorrow afternoon. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Coming up in depth and at length with the leaders, but very quickly before that, the most powerful Atlantic hurricane in recorded history is bearing down on the Caribbean. Hurricane Irma has been upgraded to a Category 5. That's the highest category. In fact, it's really big even in that category and has now sustained winds of 300 km per hour, gusts well in excess of that. It's projected to bring massive storm surges, life-threatening winds and torrential rainfall across Puerto Rico, Haiti, the Dominican Republic and Cuba before moving on to mainland USA, Florida. The BBC's Sarah Corker has the latest.
Puerto Rico will be one of the first to be hit. People there aren't taking any chances, securing their homes and stocking up on essentials. And Irma is on a collision course with popular holiday destinations like Antigua and St. Martin. With storm surges of up to 12 feet, flooding is a major concern. In the Dominican Republic, the rains have already arrived. The tourist island, like its neighbour Haiti, has issued hurricane warnings. And in Florida, a state of emergency has been declared.
The storm is massive and the storm surge that is predicted will go for miles and miles. Right now, Irma is traveling at about 15 miles per hour and the track has it forecasted to move just south of the Florida Keys on a westerly path with a slight north turn. It is incredibly important that all Floridians keep a close eye on this incredibly dangerous storm. Do not sit and wait to prepare. Get prepared now.
The storm's track may change, but at the moment it looks set to head towards the British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and by the weekend, the Florida Keys. This monster hurricane comes on the heels of Harvey, which struck Texas and Louisiana last month. But Irma is a bigger storm and potentially more dangerous. In Miami, they're preparing for the worst.
I have lived through Hurricane Andrew in Miami, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Wilma, and I just have faith in God.
And now millions of people across the Caribbean are preparing for this potentially catastrophic storm.
That was the BBC's Sarah Corker. Residents in Texas and Louisiana are still, as Sarah was pointing out, reeling from the effects of Hurricane Harvey. It's really interesting. The US National Hurricane Center is trying to predict Irma's path. It's too early, they say, to say exactly where Irma is heading. But those Texas areas smashed by Harvey could be in for another blast. It's 11 minutes past 6. New Zealand's first MMP election was in 1996. 21 years on, we're still seeing campaigns and indeed coverage of them, reflecting the supremacy of the first-past-the-post giants, National and Labour. Tonight, James Shaw, Greens leader, Marama Fox, Māori Party co-leader, and David Seymour, ACT leader, join us in the studio. We invited Winston Peters, but he wasn't available. We invited Gareth Morgan, and he said yes, which we were delighted about until Monday, when we were called and told he was being replaced by Jeff Simmons. That seemed unfair on the leaders who'd really juggled schedules to be with us, so we insisted on Gareth Morgan. He wasn't available. ACT have an electorate seat thanks to their deal with National in Epsom. The Greens are very much a 5% threshold party, although they're fighting hard for Nelson, and Materia Ture is making a late run at the country's largest electorate, Te Tai Tonga, although Labour's Rino Terekatani has a big majority there. And the Māori Party won Waiariki through Te Ururoa Flavel, of course, and added Marama Fox to their caucus by picking up sufficient party vote. Who amongst them will be back in Parliament? We had them in for morning tea this morning with delicious cake, which you will hear or see being eaten from time to time. And I began by asking James Shaw, and you can watch this on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and Sky TV, Face TV, Channel 83. I began by asking James Shaw, who will be New Zealand's next Prime Minister?
Jacinda Ardern. Look, I'm totally convinced about that, right? I was trying to work out when was the last time in New Zealand political history when any political party had a 20-point jump in its polling in the space of a fortnight. I mean,
I can tell you, James, it was Don Brash in 2004, and you know, he nearly made it.
After the Ottawa speech.
Yeah, after his classic racist diatribe on the beaches at Ottawa. Yep, he had a huge jump in the polls, trying to get the bigoted vote from New Zealand's Pale Mail style collection.
Madam Fox, who's going to be the next Prime Minister of New Zealand?
Oh, look, I think it's a really close race. I'm actually think that Bill English did very well in the debate the other night. Jacinda got some good points across, except when it got to the question about raising Māori out of poverty, and she put on her cloth cap socialist unionist perspective again and said, until you fix poverty and put food in the bellies of our children, we can't teach them. Well, that's the excuse they had throughout the entire 80s and 90s, which allowed Māori and Pacifica in this country to flounder at the bottom of every education statistic, while everybody made an excuse that they couldn't teach them because they didn't have books at home or shoes on their feet. Now, that's rubbish, and Hekia Parata has proven that it's rubbish. Charter schools prove that it's rubbish. Māori medium schools prove that it's rubbish. In Huntly, where you have an area of great disparity, the top performing school in this nation is Rākau Mangamanga.
David Seymour, who is going to be the next Prime Minister of New Zealand? I'm going to ask you all this question. So far, James is saying Jacinda Ardern. Madam, I'm not sure who you were saying. You were saying Bill English.
I think it's too close to call.
Right.
I think it is.
David Seymour?
Look, it's a very close election, and I'm glad we're having this discussion because third parties actually will make the difference.
That's right.
The way I've said it is, look, Jacinda Ardern is always going to be a shooting star. The only question is whether New Zealanders are going to make her Prime Minister before she starts the descent.
Didn't people say the same thing about John Key? I remember people saying, I remember people in the Labor Party saying, John Key's a shooting star, the only question is how long before he starts the descent. Well, as it turned out, it was 8 years.
Yeah, exactly, and I suspect that her descent will be a little bit quicker. You know, the difference between her and the current lot and Helen Clark and Michael Cullen's government is that Clark and Cullen they'd lived through the 70s. They'd seen what Muldoon did to New Zealand. They'd been members of the fourth Labour government. They did actually have some sensibility about the world. These guys are the first generation of student politicians who will be a government. And someone like Chris Hipkins thinks there's nothing wrong with ringing up your mate in Australia, using parliamentary privilege to try and play political games across the ditch. That's seriously dangerous. People need to look at Labour's industrial relations policy, which is back to the 70s.
How old are you?
Yeah, I'm 34.
You are a first-term 34-year-old, and you're being condescending about the Labour Party.
Yep, that's right, because I'm not promising to be Prime Minister. I'm promising to introduce ideas to a government that does actually have experienced people. That's why I'm supporting Bill English to be Prime Minister over Jacinda Ardern. That's why a vote for ACT is a vote for centre-right government, because actually that other lot are a little bit dangerous, and I've got every right to call them out on that.
James Shaw, I know that the point of this discussion is to do more than reduce politics to some kind of horse race, right?
Yeah.
But we need to talk about your poll ratings.
Yeah.
Where are you sitting, do you think?
Based on the best data that we've got, and I think Radio New Zealand's poll of polls has us on, I think, about 6.8, something like that at the moment. The last set of polls has us creeping north, and that is the direction of travel that we want to be in.
How brutal have the past few weeks been?
Actually, the past few weeks have been great. So I've spent the last couple of weeks out on the campaign trail anywhere between Queenstown and Whangarei.
So you should be buggered, right, by now. You should actually be the walking dead, basically. But you are rather enjoying this, aren't you?
I'm having a great time. I'm having a great time, John. I honestly am.
And what is great about the time you're having?
Look, so this is obviously my first campaign, not just as a Member of Parliament, but also as the leader of the party. And so this campaign has a different quality to it from the previous campaigns I've been a part of. So I have been all over the country, you know, east, west, north, south. And I'm getting to interact with communities and with groups of people from different walks of life that I would never have had the opportunity to otherwise. And it is a fantastic experience. And people, like, I mean, you know, you talk about the hunger for change. I mean, this is why I'm saying with such confidence that Jacinda Ardern will be the next Prime Minister, because on the ground, I really detect that strong mood for change.
Will the Greens be back in Parliament?
Yes, absolutely.
Will the Māori Party be back in Parliament, Madam Fox?
Guarantee it. put money on it.
Okay, so in order for that to happen, you have to get 5%, which the poll suggests is highly unlikely, or a seat. Now,
that's right.
The seat you hold is Waiariki. How is Te Aurora?
The party holds is Waiariki. So Tūroro, lots of polling have them close. Our internal polling don't have them as close as others.
When you talk about them, you're talking about Te Aurora and Tamati Coffey for Labour, who is a strong Labour candidate.
Well, he is a strong Labour candidate, but Tūroro Flavel has a proven track record, is a very good minister, is reliable, has great integrity, and he is well known around the traps in Waiariki for actually just being a down-to-earth guy. He's always at the marae. He's always working for his whānau.
Do you think he'll win?
Absolutely, guaranteed.
Now, what happened last time is he won. The party got 1.2, 1.3, which meant that you came in on the party vote.
That's right.
This time, you have Howie Tamati running a very strong campaign in Hauauru, right?
That's right.
And so if you win 2 electorate seats...
we plan on winning more than that,
right,
by the way.
But that imperils your ability to get back in on the party vote, doesn't it?
Absolutely it does. We need to either have more party votes than we do seats, or I have to win my seat. That's the only way back in.
And you are a way behind there, aren't you?
I'm a little way behind, and our polls have us, have me about, our internal polls about 6%, Labour's internal polls about 8%. The poll that Marae did on the weekend was 16%. But you can feel that. There is a strong Labour loyalty. The loyalty is not to the incumbent MP, it's to Parikura Horomia and to the Labour Party. They've held that seat for 70 years. So I felt that there was a really good swing till Jacinda came in. So our people are looking at the polls going, we could change the government. And you feel that on the ground. You go door knocking, they want to change. And so the polls are reflecting that, and we need to crawl that back because they need partners and they need an independent voice, because you look at the Māori MPs inside the Labour caucus and they are hamstrung by their leadership. Every time they punt up an idea that they think might be good, they're told, get back in your box. We don't want that kaupapa Māori idea. That's not our policy. And I'm yet to hear Jacinda come out and say strongly exactly what is their policy around treaty, around Māori rights and water, around the real Māori language being taught in schools. There are so many Māori specific issues that Labour are campaigning on that they think they're going to be able to have the voice for, yet I'm yet to see one policy from them that says so.
One of the things that also hasn't been talked about much is climate change, and James Shaw will come back and talk to you about that, but I want to go to David Seymour and talk about Epsom. Are you going to win it?
Well, the polls have got me 16 points ahead, and the level of recognition and warmth I get knocking on doors and so on is much greater than last time.
What response do you get?
The biggest difference this time is that it used to be, you know, hi, I'm David, and now they say, yeah, we know, welcome. So that's a big difference. And a lot of people just tell me unsolicited that, you know, we're going to vote for you, so that's really nice.
Why? Why are they going to vote for you?
A couple of reasons. One is that I have actually taken being an electorate MP very seriously. You know, it's a real honour to be sent by your neighbours to represent them in Wellington and to be the last line of defence on a lot of issues. People have issues with the healthcare system, ACC, immigration, taxation, council, etc. So I've been there for them. About 2,500 people have come through my office. But the other reason is the simple logic.
Sorry to interrupt. 2,500 people have come through your office in the same way that Peter Dunn worked being an electorate MP very effectively. So they've come to talk about block drains and all the classic.
And look, some of them you can end in a phone call. Others, I was on your show a while ago with Anna Carolina Butcham. You know, we've been fighting beside her and her family for 2 years.
So you think you've got it?
Look, all the indications look that way, but I'll never be complacent. What it does mean is that me winning Epsom means every party vote for ACT counts towards getting more ACT MPs, and that is critical in this election because, you know, I hate to say it to James, but, you know, the poll of polls is actually going down. It's still being held up by those old polls before the slump. These guys are in serious danger of being out of Parliament, being a wasted vote, and it's going to be one of the tragedies of this election. But one of the feistiest and most fun MPs in Parliament, who's a million times better than most of our colleagues, and won't be back.
And you're talking about Marama Fox there.
That's right.
It's a tragedy. You are Dr. Deathman. You love telling people they're heading out of vote. You say it's tragic and you're very sorry.
I can't help it, John, because I'm a recovering electrical political engineer, and I just look at the numbers,
Yeah,
and they're not good for you guys.
You have the good grace of National rolling over and say, please vote and get this boy in.
Yeah,
I do believe
because
that
without ACT in the long term, they have no coalition partner, and they're stuffed. So we work together very well,
no
and it's called having a political strategy.
So you've just told James Shaw that he's leaving Parliament. James Shaw is looking across at you as you speak and nodding in agreement with what you're saying.
No, rubbish. I'm smiling because I hear this from David pretty much every day. We find ourselves on forums all over the place, and it's something that he kind of bangs on because it's useful to his political.
I used to work with someone who used to say, "We're all going to die."
I'm trying to.
They were right.
This is a bit of cross-party assistance. I'm trying to help Green voters who are in danger of wasting their vote.
Oh my goodness!
From the goodness of your heart.
Absolutely. That's just how I roll.
James Shaw, are you too reasonable? I've got here a New Zealand Herald article, and the headline is Greens Unveil Poverty Plan for 100,000 Kids, right?
Yes.
Do you know what the date of that is?
Yeah, 2014.
It's 2011.
Oh, it's the 11
August
one.
2011.
Okay. Yeah.
6 years before Bill English had that.
We've been setting the agenda since ages ago.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Marama.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It has been in our coalition agreement since the very first day we walked in.
Yeah, and I'll talk to you about what has been meaningfully achieved.
I'm not sure anyone's campaigning in favour of child poverty. The issue is how do you solve it, and that's why there's been so little progress.
I do want to talk to James Shaw, though, about the fact that you seem to be way ahead of what we
everyone on everything.
Thank you.
Okay. And now, of course, everyone's saying, yes, theoretically we want to do something about the climate, but it didn't make a single appearance in the Leaders' Debate.
No, it did not. No, I was pretty disappointed by that, actually.
Okay. So how do you make that relevant when everyone is talking about housing, about child poverty?
By getting into government. So, I mean, we are the only party that has made climate change the centrepiece of our election campaign.
You wouldn't know
and we know that people, don't kind of, there's a lot of people who kind of aren't, they're worried about it, but it's like it's not very high up their list of priorities. But that is the point of, a pluralistic political environment, is that you've got parties who say, actually, this is important.
Well, hold on. I've got a question for you then about climate change. If climate change is your pivotal campaigning strategy, the thing you care most about, the Globe organisation of which we're all members in a cross-party agreement, David was headed by Kennedy Graham, who you've now got rid of.
I didn't get rid of him, he walked out.
And then wanted to come back and you fellas said, no, thank you very much.
The thing is that climate change is larger than one person. Every political party is larger than one person. I have been leading on climate change, for years, as have other MPs.
I guess the point is, and I know you answered this and you said re-elect the Greens, but it strikes me that people either plagiarise the Greens or completely ignore your central policy when it's convenient to do so. And your job is to assert the relevance.
That's what, and to be in government. Right?
But are you achieving that? Are you achieving that connection with the electorate this time round?
Ask me again on the 24th of September.
I'm asking you now.
So, yes, actually, yes, we are. And I think that there has been a significant change in the last 20 years in terms of public opinion around climate change. It has now elevated to the point where people are really concerned about it, that it does have a much broader constituency, whereas there is actually a great deal of consensus in society now that didn't exist only 10 years ago.
James,
and if you look at the current Prime Minister,
hold on a sec, just so we'll come back to you, David.
If you look at the current Prime Minister, who only 10 years ago drove a tractor up the steps of Parliament to protest the idea that farmers might have to pay a small levy in order to assist with agricultural emissions research, which his government, later on introduced, I think that the things have changed. But no other party is making it the top of their political agenda. And I think for people who are saying, actually, if you look at the long-term challenges facing New Zealand and the world, of which climate change is clearly at the forefront, then that is why the Green Party needs to be at the heart of that.
Do you have a statement about climate change refugees in your policy?
Yes, we do.
Kapai.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, Marama, thank you for raising that.
Well, we do too.
So not just a statement, we've actually proposed creating a new humanitarian visa category for Pacific Islanders who are displaced by rising seas, because at the moment they're not recognised by the United Nations refugee system. So we want to get that started.
So that's the highest priority for the Greens, right? Well, at the top of the list. David Seymour, what is it for you in ACT?
Oh, it's housing and education, and they go together. You know, if you're worried about child poverty, you've got to break the cycle with better education, but you've also got to recognise that the biggest cost that the poorest New Zealanders face, you know, 30 years ago when we passed the RMA, the poorest New Zealanders were spending 27% of their income on housing. Now it's exactly double that to 54. So you wonder why there's stories about people living in cars and garages, why we've got children literally dying from being brought up in unhealthy homes, why we've got this generational divide of haves and have-nots, why you've got so much agitation about immigration. It all comes back to the fundamental problem that we built half as many houses as we built in the 1970s because of stupid council red tape and regulation.
Absolutely. Can I just interject there? Because you made a really passionate and compelling case on behalf of what we might lazily describe as an underclass. And I'm sorry for you, I hate that term, but it's a shorthand that works when you haven't got much time. You've also been part of propping up a government under which all the indicators you describe have got worse over the past few years. Haven't they?
Well, the key to a sane life, John, is to focus on the things you can change and let other people deal with the things you can't. If you look at what I've done in government, we've been there to say, look, you've got to fix this housing problem. You've got to replace our land use planning laws. I used to have discussions with John Key about this and say, when are we going to sort it? He'd say, well, we got 59 votes and you've got 1. Do you know anyone else in Parliament who'll help us replace our land use planning regime? Now, unfortunately, and I hate to say it, Marama, but these guys decided it was more important that the iwi got consulted about the building of homes than building homes for the poorest people in New Zealand. That's what you guys did, and you have consigned people to poverty by refusing to allow those reforms to occur.
Absolute rubbish.
Well, did you vote for the RMA reforms or not?
The amendment that we negotiated?
Yep, that you weakened at every step of the way.
We're the ones who got it in.
If anything, you stalled it for 2 years.
We didn't stall it for 2 years.
Yes, you did. And
no,
we now have Resource Management Act reforms.
I'm sorry, but you weren't in the negotiations that we had.
I absolutely was.
Madam Fox,
and
can I
ask you? You guys weren't on board for serious reform of land use regulation that would allow us to build homes and alleviate poverty for your people and the rest of New Zealand.
Oh, so you're blaming us for poverty?
It's a shame.
You're blaming the Māori Party for poverty in this country.
John, I'm sorry.
No, you're not sorry. You're not sorry. That was a disingenuous sorry.
But do you think anyone in their right mind in the whole of Māori takes you seriously?
You just plough on like Bill English's bulldozer on the parliamentary steps.
Our flagship policy.
David Seymour.
Hey, hang on a second.
No. You
our
had
flagship
your time.
policy,
You've said your
Partnership
say,
School
and nobody takes you seriously, David,
by the
because you
iwi
say it from your enlightened, entitled position.
Madam Fox,
personal attacks again.
What is the thing you are most proud of achieving in your association with a national-led government?
Increased spending for whānau ora, for one, so that it can be rolled out to help the thousands of families, 45,000 families. In the last 3 years alone, we've had over 300 people helped into their own homes, 76 new entities just in the South Island of Māori who came and said, this is where we're at.
How much
Here's
money?
our aspiration.
How much money whānau ora?
What is that?
About $170 million a year.
How many people helped into their new homes?
About 300.
What about the Māori Housing Network? How much money?
Hold on. We're not Housing New Zealand.
I know.
I'm not the housing minister.
I know. I'm just
Let's clarify this.
Let's scrutinise on a bang for your buck basis.
Let's scrutinise on a bang for your buck about the people who have moved themselves out of poverty and into job creation, the people who have moved themselves out of poverty and into a safe, warm home, the people